I heard this when I was growing up,
Yeah.
people telling me, because you're overseas and you mixed up identity. I'm like, I don't have mixed up identity. I know who I am.
You're also an Aquarius.
Yes.
I would bounce like on my knees. And one of my friends had this junior guy come up and say, "Oh, BG, you look really," I don't know if he said you look stupid or something, but he said something about you might want to stop doing that. I remember the thought process because I was like, you're getting a D plus in algebra trig, and I'm getting a B plus, A minus. And you're trying to call me stupid?
I always loved being an expat kid. I loved it. And it was always something that made me special.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to KTVG Studio. As you can see, Katie and I have already started on the laugh track.
Yes.
We hope you will join us. Today, we are going to be discussing third culture kids or people, it should be, but um, TCK is an abbreviation that oftentimes gets used. So that's why I said third culture kids. Katie just informed me she had never heard of it. And just
Nope.
by dint of like where she has lived and gone to school, she is a classic case of one. So, what is a
I
third
am.
culture kid? I think there's a number of different definitions. I'm just going to tell you kind of colloquially. It's somebody who, likely their parents or even them, were born somewhere else. And then they grow up, whether totally or partially, in another place. So, military children are very typically third culture kids, especially those whose parent gets stationed overseas and they go and live with the parent who is overseas. Just because they have, at minimum, the culture that
Mhm.
their parents were born into. And that's just saying their parents were born into the same one, which is not always the case.
Mhm.
Then they also have military culture. So, for all that the US military is US culturally based, it itself has a certain way of doing things and a certain culture.
Yep.
So you might have some people who maybe spent their whole life in one country, but maybe they lived in different places that have different cultures. And I'll give you an example of, let's say somebody was born and initially raised in the Northeast. If they move to the South, they're going to have a cultural difference. Still the United States, but it's gonna be culturally different for them. Now, that might not make them a third culture kid, that might just be 2, but it's moving in that direction. But a lot of times, it's people who go to school in another culture. So you will have some of the folks who, like when I was going to Columbia, there were a number of people who were from China. And it wasn't like some of these people had gone to school, high school in the United States, and then were going to college in the United States. Um, and they were growing up, they were Chinese, their parents were Chinese, they were still
Mhm.
Chinese citizens, but the culture that they were living in while they were going to school was very distinct. So that's a kind of base colloquial level. Is there anything you'd want to add, Katie?
Yes, so I did a research on this, and the term was coined by a sociologist couple called John and Ruth Useem, Useem, in the 1950s. So they started using this term because they were in India and they were fascinated by expat kids in India, kids that were there because their parents were missionaries from the States or wherever else, non Indian, or diplomatic kids. So then they were studying it and they used the coin kind of they coined the term informally in the 50s. And then Ruth Useem came out with a paper in 73 specifically using this term and showing her findings. So there's been this field of study around TCKs, varying degrees of definitions, just like you said, but generally speaking, kids that grow up to 18 in a foreign country. So the three cultures are the first is their home culture, The second is the host country's culture. And then the third, interstitial culture. So it's a culture
Interstitial.
that's uh, in between. It's a different group
They create a new
grouping.
culture. Yeah.
Um, and I have never heard this term in my life, even though I am a third culture kid, diplomat kid. Um, but I always knew I was in a different grouping. I always knew it. I just called it like international culture or whatever. But I think because you're right. Army is its own culture again. So I mean, really, you can have more than three. I think, but it's sort of like an umbrella term, I
Mhm.
guess. Mm,
Yeah, and
yeah.
I think that a lot of third culture kids end up with more than 3. Because even if we looked at you, Katie, you didn't just live in the US and Japan, you also lived in South Korea, which
Yes.
may have some commonalities with the others, but that creates another element in that mix. Also, I think diplomats' kids have certain things that they learn that are sort of inherent to that environment. You know, that there are certain things that you know to do and not do, for example, or
Mm,
say and not say, or talk about and not talk about, just by dint of growing up within that milieu, you get that aspect kind of thing. And it's interesting that they talk about it as kids because one of the other things that I've always been fascinated about is accents. And a lot of the research about accents are that people normally adopt the accent of the people that they're near during adolescence.
mm.
So, like 16 is a very, I remember it as being a very critical moment of the accent that you, it doesn't mean people
Oh,
won't change their accents or it won't get influenced by other things later, but just
yeah.
that the most basic element of one's accent often comes out from where one was for US purposes during high school, for example.
Mm,
Like,
mhm.
but I would say somewhere between about 7th grade and 12th grade, your accent gets laid down. So I think it's interesting too that when the Useems were looking at this, they were looking at people who lived somewhere else under the like up until age 18. And there was something that I sent you earlier, and I know that you commented on it Instagram, but the term expat. I
Mm,
love like that has a very specific meaning and we tend to understand it. But um I would group immigrants into this as well in terms of people who
I
uh
wouldn't.
I would, and the reason I would is that when you have people who emigrate someplace,
Mhm,
they grow up with a mix of between the culture of that their family came from, the
mhm,
culture that they're living in, and the interstitial one in between the two. So they themselves are third culture. And the other thing I think about is the US started sending back kids who had been brought to the US young, but did not have the appropriate paperwork to be here. But those
mhm,
children, especially some who were brought as infants, they were brought as 2 or 3 or 4-year-olds, had grown up, had gone to school, everything their whole lives in the United States. And then they were shipped back, for example, to the El Salvador, Guatemalan, Nicaraguan triangle, and they had very little. I mean, some of them didn't even speak Spanish, let alone the indigenous languages in those places. Um, and they had some sense of culture from their parents, but they were not of the place that they were being sent back to.
mhm.
So those are the reasons that I think of them as being.
I don't agree on the immigrant thing because although I can see if you if you expand more the term third culture kid, I can see how you could fit it in. But when I was reading all the studies and everything on this specific term and how they use third culture kids, the USEAMs, and then
Okay.
how the other people, the studies that followed, looks at it. There's I don't think it's the same with the immigrant kids because when immigrants come into a country, there's an expectation that, as you said, they've moved, and there is a third culture aspect to it for sure. I agree. But the this TCK term was used looking at kids, they're not expected to live in the host country. There's no expectation to settle down roots. We're there 2 years, 4 years. I mean, yes, of course, some corporation people, like I knew some IBM people that were there for like 8 years, but you're not actually meant to put roots down. You might, I suppose, you might come back or you might stay and do college there, but the general concept is you're kind of floating through. um, I think it's semantics because you're right. Yes, I think the immigrant culture aspect of it is very rich and interesting and dynamic. I don't know if they fit into this, but maybe they could. I don't really know if they haven't been in all the studies and like research wise. Um,
Which
and
makes
so
me
that's why.
it makes me look at it the way that the Instagram post I sent you that talked about the difference between expats and migrants, and that there's a real, I can't remember how they put it, but they were talking about how it was almost a social class difference, and the
Well,
reason I
it is kind of like a white. It's a very white colonial aspect
term,
to it.
yeah,
Yeah.
but when you were talking, I was thinking about a lot of the original migrant workers into, like, California and Texas and stuff did not have an idea or even a desire necessarily to stay. Like, they came in for the
Mm,
work. They had their children here because that's where they were living when they had children and the work, and their idea was always to go home. So by
mm.
that definition, the original sort of migrant workers would fall in with
But
this.
see, that's a different term now you're using. You're using the term
I am,
migrant worker, which
yes,
is different from immigrant. I think
it is,
immigrant actually means someone who's come to live in a country,
yes.
right?
And my comment on at least the current state of the US, and I wanna be clear that the people who were being sent back, this was happening in the Obama administration. So this is not a commentary just on our current
Mm,
administration.
mhm,
Um, I'm just talking 21st century, where in the 19th and 20th century, the US was an immigrant, I don't know if you could call it a paradise, but it was a place where people came, moved, stayed. Under the
mhm,
modern way, a lot of people are not being allowed to stay, even
mm,
though their intent may have been to come to move here and stay. They're not
yeah.
necessarily being allowed to do that. Um, and I switched up my terminology because I was talking about immigrants before, but I was talking about the immigrants who'd been forced to return, based on what you had said. Just looking for another term that in our society is oftentimes applied to the non-white members of our
Now,
society.
if those migrant workers brought their kids, they would be third third culture kids
Mhm, that's what
with
I was
the
saying.
intent to head back. I don't know if they did, if because
They did.
I know
I
there's a
mean,
lot of people on the planet that go in another country and work to send money back and then go back. So men and women
and
without their kids.
they So I haven't done in-depth studies on this, but on the bits and pieces that I've looked at, and when I was out in California, I met a number of people who were very involved with the farm workers of
Mm,
America.
mhm,
But
mhm,
they described that some of the people who were coming, well, first of all, you had, I don't know, a million or something, um, actual Mexican Americans, like, born in the US that were shipped to
Mm.
Mexico in, like, the 30s. Um, but you had people who were coming just to work with the
Mhm.
idea of going home, but some of them had children here. Like,
Okay.
some of them brought their children because they didn't have anybody to leave them with, kinds of things. So, it wasn't a case. I mean, there were definitely people who came just to work and send money home. There's
Mm,
still
mm.
people who come to work and send money home.
Yeah.
But there were children involved in some of these.
Oh,
So,
okay. That's
yeah.
interesting.
And I don't know, I don't think I normally, maybe I do. I don't think I normally get into too much of the semantic stuff. It was just having seen the reel on Instagram about the term expat and how, like you described, it will get used for colonizers who are in, or former colonizers who are in
I
a
think
country
it's
that's not
from
their own.
that era. Yeah.
Yeah. But it is rarely applied. Like, I would consider those the Chinese students that are expats. Like, as far as I know and as far as I've heard, their plan is to go home to China. Like, they're here in the US for schooling because it gives them an advantage, even at home. But, um, they're not
I
l
wonder if they use a term like expat. I know it's a very European term. I don't know what other cultures use when they're
Yeah,
I
I
never
don't
thought
either.
about it.
And
Actually.
the other thing is, like, there was a time when Latin was sort of the,
Mm.
I don't know if it was the whole world, but it was a certain world that was the lingua franca, the language of business and stuff. There was another time when French became like the lingua franca. I think if we go back far enough, there were other languages. But right now, and it may be shifting, but right now that particular language is English.
Yes.
So I could even see, even if there is another word, I could even see expat being used even in other languages.
Yeah, but I'd be interested to know that because I
Yeah.
don't know if that it would be true because I have never if someone out there who is watching this can please inform us. If you're from another country, do you use a word like expat or something similar or the actual word expat? Because I'm very interested now. Yeah.
And I was trying to think of, like, both in Spanish and in French,
Mm. Mm.
where I worked for a summer someplace. I worked in Spain for a summer. I did a fellowship, and we went to school in Geneva, but spent time in France, and I don't ever recall a term
No.
being used. Doesn't mean there isn't one. I'm just saying that
No, yeah,
trying to
absolutely.
plumb the memory banks,
Hmm.
I'm I'm not, nothing that I can think of.
I don't
So I
know.
would be curious as well. I'm very curious as to, um, is there a term that other cultures or countries or languages use to describe somebody who's gone to live in another country, but is not emigrating there? Not they're working there, maybe they're studying there, but they're not expecting to stay there forever. Their idea is to return home. Whether they do or not is another question. But
Now I'm getting in the nitty-gritty here. Now,
okay.
I don't think students count as under that term.
Well, no, because they're over 18, most of the students.
No, no, expat. You can't I don't you I it doesn't I don't think that would apply
Oh,
to a student. I think it has to be someone who's working now. I didn't deep dive into this term, so I don't know, but that's my if you're a student, you're a student, you know.
yes.
Um, it's an international term. Student.
And a lot of countries have
I think expat
words.
is for people that are working.
An expat is short for expatriate, someone who lives outside their country of origin usually for an extended period of time. It often refers to people who moved abroad for work, retirement, or lifestyle reasons.
Yes.
Though
Retirement.
the
Yeah.
term can sometimes carry different connotations depending on context.
Yeah. 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 So your Chinese students aren't going to be expats.
That's funny because I would classify them as such. Maybe not, I would not classify students under like non-college students, but I know this doesn't fit the definition. I'm talking about my own personal perception.
Hmm.
Somebody who's gone to study in another country, who's not like it's a lifestyle reason, it's some other work reason, but they've gone to study somewhere else with the idea of going home. And that's funny with the idea of going home because when I look at, for example, all of the American retirees who moved to Mexico without
Mm.
papers, by the way, because they could live on their retirement there and get access to universal health care there for very small fees. Uh,
Mm.
they often get called expats, but I don't consider them
Yes.
expats. I consider them immigrants because they're living there for lifestyle
Mm.
reasons. Maybe they haven't given up their home country,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
they're not, it's not like they're living part-time in both places.
That's very interesting. I think your view is different from mine, and I just spent
Mhm,
20 years being an
yeah.
expat, but um I would never say a student is an expat. Um I think because why wouldn't I say that? Because they're they're studying. Like it's I think in the world of expat, that's a different category. Now, your retiree example is very interesting because I agree with you, actually.
Mhm,
Hmm, they are. They're immigrant. They immigrated.
yeah. I think the major difference and why they might the term might get used for them is that most of them have not like applied for or are not seeking citizenship in the country that they have
Hmm.
essentially immigrated to. They're living there, but
It's funny because you're right. They should be considered immigrants, but they around the world they'd be considered an expat.
yeah,
Yeah.
and they're called expats all the time.
Oh.
Which,
Hmm.
look, language is morphs based on how people use it. So it is being, I mean, that's the way it's used. That's the way it's
Oh.
used, you know? Right now, we're just sort of putting a magnifying glass, I guess, to it, you know,
Yeah.
like in a way that most people using terms aren't doing, you know,
Hmm.
like when I took a look at this whole thing, the third culture kids, I was most interested because I've been hearing it for years. I'm talking about, I don't know if we were in college the first time I heard it, but it has been more than
Well,
30
here's
years.
a interesting trivia for you. So the
Mhm.
book Third Culture Kids, there's been 3 editions so far. The first edition came out in '99.
Okay.
And then the second edition was in 2009. And for some reason, that created a spike in research studies on third culture kids. And then the third edition was 2017. So there is a
So
book out there.
maybe it was 99. Maybe I'm conflating
Oh, I don't
a
know.
lot.
I mean,
But
it was used before that, so you may have
okay.
heard it. Yeah.
I definitely had heard it, and I was telling Katie, before, like, Facebook existed, there were things like
Mm.
Friendster, and MySpace, and I think it was actually all the way back to Friendster. I stumbled across a group called Army Brats,
Mm.
and they actually kept for a while, like, an email chain kinda thing going, but I joined it having grown up. I mean, I was 14 when my dad retired, so I was born on a military base,
Mm.
and I lived on them until I was 14 years old. So, they talked about this aspect, and one of the things that this group touched on, again, this was the 90s, so, like, remembering exactly what was all said, I don't know. But one of the things that I do recall coming out, and my mom, so my mom was born when her father was serving in Korea. So, like, she was born into an army family.
Mm.
She left Puerto Rico when she was 7, and they first moved to Frankfurt. So she'd grown up in this as well. So my mom and I have had conversations, maybe
Mm.
not using the term third culture kid, but we've had conversations about, like, what are the benefits and drawbacks of
Mhm.
growing up in this way? And so that was what kind of I looked at, because I also noted, or maybe it's just my mom and I talking about, we notice whenever there is somebody who is like an Air Force brat, an Army brat, a Navy brat, that there's a number of them who are journalists. And so you end up seeing them on and my mom,
Yeah.
I don't know how, but she always finds out, oh, so and so's dad was in the was was Air Force, or so, like, and she's always telling me. So I'm like,
No.
okay. Um, she watches the news in a way that I do not watch the news anymore. So I looked at benefits and drawbacks. I, of course, want to touch on benefits first. So, one of the major benefits that I think most of us would agree is adaptability. When you, before the age of 18, have had to move between places, you know that you can. Or even if all you've had to do is move between schools, you have experience of it. You have experience that goes beyond surviving it. So moving between places can often make it easier. Not for everyone.
Yeah.
This is not a blanket statement. This is, research shows it can make it easier to adjust to new surroundings, whether that's jobs or social settings. There's an
Mhm.
adaptability that these people often have. There's also a cross cultural understanding. Growing up as a TCK means that right in your face, there was an aspect that not every culture or every looks at things the same way. You grew up with this. It's not like you're confronted with it as an adult. You saw it from your earliest days. So, cross cultural understanding, TCKs often develop strong awareness of different customs, perspectives, and ways of communicating. So, I'm remembering moving back to the United States from Germany and my mom having to tell me to stop staring. And I was like, "What do you mean?" I was just looking. Because in Germany, you could just look at people and it wasn't perceived as rude or
Mm.
impolite. But in the US, that sort of just directed looking at someone has a different perception to it.
Mm.
I
Mhm.
I moved to Germany when I was 5.5. I was 10 now. I didn't have that innate understanding. She had to, like, point out to me that that was not gonna be seen the same way in the United States, that I needed to, like, soften my gaze, not be looking directly at somebody, especially if I wasn't engaged in a conversation with them. So, that was one thing I had to learn. Language and interpersonal skills. Many gain
Mm.
multilingual ability and a knack for connecting with people from different backgrounds. I think, Katie, you and I both have this, but I'm often fascinated. I want to learn more about somebody who comes from a background that isn't exactly like mine. Like, I'm normally very interested and curious. Like, I don't always have a set idea about what that culture is like. So I'm always very curious. And then the last one that they list as benefits is open mindedness. Exposure to multiple cultures can make someone more tolerant, curious, and
Mhm.
globally minded.
Mm.
Where,
Mhm.
like, if I'm going to look at the news, I want to know what's happening on this great big blue marble everywhere, not just in my own locality. So
Mm.
those were the benefits. Did you have anything you wanted to say about benefits or
I
expand?
also looked at that because I was kind of interested in that aspect as well. Because when growing up, I went to international schools, and there's probably like there was like a group of us from the embassy that would go. I mean, a big portion of the school are local host nation rich kids.
Mhm.
Um, but there were kids, American kids, that I think were struggling. They struggled a bit with being a third culture kid. So I was kind of curious what if there were any studies about it, and lo and behold, there were quite a few studies on this. term that I'd never heard of. So I I found one in 2021, so not super old. They did a systematic review of various articles, and they found 31 articles about TCKs 2000 to 2018, looking at benefits and uh, maybe some negative aspects of
I have a
being.
list of drawbacks. I was just hitting the
Mm.
benefits. So
So, but I think the number one issue with the general review was they found that the definition of TCK varied so much between studies. It was a little bit apples to oranges at times. But in general, the positives were greater resilience, um, and adaptability, being open to different cultures, um, worldview, everything that you just said. Um, shall I just name a few of the negatives and then you
yeah,
can
go
go
ahead.
into your negatives? So the negatives were less comfortable forming close relationships. I don't know why that would be the case. Um, and I thought it was interesting. They said weaker ethnic identity. I was like really confused by weaker ethnic identity, and I didn't really understand what that meant. So I looked up weaker ethnic identity on its own, and I found this study about it. Actually, it was his PhD guy, his thesis, and he was talking about it in his paragraphs because he was looking at Arab American discrimination in the United States and using ethnic identity as one of the factors. And it said that one of the most important psychological resources that an individual utilizes to demonstrate resilience against discrimination is ethnic identity. It's a source of strength, can be a source of strength, and influences how someone can cope with discrimination. So that's a complete, absolute tangent. But yeah,
I
I
appreciate
was
that.
so curious why that I didn't understand that. But anyway, yes, we're less comfortable forming close relationships, everybody.
So that is one of the ones that I found as well. It said
Huh.
harder long-term relationships, but it was attributed to repeated relocations can make friendships and family routines harder to maintain. So I think the harder
I
long-term
don't think that's
relationships,
true.
I think that that may come into play for somebody who feels like the moves are too frequent or they feel dislodged. But to
I
the point about
guess.
ethnic center
Mhm.
is, for example, I have a concept and I found out later that it wasn't really true. Like my best friend from first grade, Indira, I thought she moved away because
Huh.
she wasn't in my second grade class and I didn't
Huh.
see her at recess. So I thought she had moved away. I found out from Indira that they didn't leave until after third grade.
Oh,
She was still in
well,
the same school.
was she hiding from you?
I don't know if it's just young memory, like six,
Oh,
seven,
you deleted
8.
her for a whole year.
Yeah, I deleted
Oh
or I
my
didn't see
god.
her. I mean, it's possible that we just didn't have the same recess schedule or something, and I just did not see her, but,
Yeah.
um, we met up again in New York City in the early 2000s. This was actually she found me on MySpace because she was checking on her teenage
Oh,
daughter's MySpace, and so they had come up for a trip, and I went and met up with them. But yeah, I thought she was gone. So I have this sense that, like, even though I moved about after the age of 5 about every 4 years, so it wasn't a lot,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
My sense, again, this is my own mental sense, was that even if I stayed in the same place, everybody around me was moving. So, like, nobody was
Mm.
still there kind of thing, you know? Um, but one thing I did carry, and I'm wearing my little Puerto Rican flag, is that both of my parents were Puerto Rican.
Mhm.
And when it came to traditions, when it came to family, it was very rooted in Puerto Rican culture and identity. Again, I mean, though my mom had gone to school in the States in New Jersey, Kentucky, and Texas. She did not ascribe to being an American in terms of the traditional sense because she was the youngest of 6. All of her older siblings had been born and, for the most part, raised in Puerto Rico. She was 7. Her next closest older brother was 9 when they left Puerto Rico. But so she was Puerto Rican. She took that with her. Everywhere that I lived, we had that. So we had that strong identity of who we were. And I mean, my dad didn't leave Puerto Rico till he was 20, going on 21. So it was like imbued in him. And we're talking about at least both of them have native within their DNA structure. Um, but even with the immigrants, we're talking some of them could have been there since like the 1500s. So long term. So I think the harder long term relationships, I feel like they're not spelling it out here, but I think they're talking about like I did go to high school with people who'd gone to school together since they were kindergartners. So kindergarten through high
Oh,
school.
yes, that's very common in America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when I see these guys on Facebook and stuff, a lot of them are still meeting up. They're still really good friends. They're still hanging around. I don't have that with them. I don't have anything like negative, but I don't have that sort of rooted relationship. I mean, I have my cousins in Puerto Rico, but I didn't necessarily grow up next to them or alongside them. So I think that sometimes people look at that and see it as potentially harder to form.
Mm. Yeah, I think you're right because I've met Americans that are like, "Oh yeah, I'm same schools and we've all been together since kindergarten." And for me, I'm just like, "What?" Like that
Yeah.
sounds really weird to me, but you do you. But I met this lady a couple months ago and she's has older kids now, but she's Japanese American. I think she married a Japanese national. Anyway, they live here near DC. And she grew up overseas. So Madagascar, Congo, whatever, dad's work. Um, and came back for college, like me. And then she said, when I don't know why she was sharing this with me, but she said when she married this guy and they decided they were going to have kids, they decided not to move. And I said, I was horrified for her. And I said, why? Why would you do that? And she said, well, because I, I think she's a TCK kid who struggles with this aspect because she said, yeah, because I grew up overseas and, you can't really develop strong relationships or friendships. And we were standing in this parking lot, so I couldn't really go into depth into this. But I said, really? And because I was like, I have plenty of long term. I am friends with a Swedish girl that I was friends with in middle school, 7th grade in Korea, international school. I'm friends still with high school that I graduated with, Tokyo friends. So I was kind of like, I don't understand, but okay, fair,
Well,
fine.
I am friendly in the sense that we follow each other on like Facebook and Instagram with people that I went to high school with. But I haven't had a conversation with any of them since the last high school reunion that we were able to have because one of
Mm,
them was supposed to be in 2020 and it didn't happen, obviously. Um, so that would have been 2010. I don't think I've had a verbal conversation with any of them since 2010. Um, I don't have any negative feelings, but I didn't develop a really strong tie to anybody in
mm,
high school. My closest friends are from college when we're looking at long term. I'm still Facebook friends with somebody who found me on Facebook. When you have an unusual nickname, it is much easier for people to find you. So when I say they found me, it's because sometimes it can be really hard for me to find them. Like I have a friend I'm looking for from elementary school, Madeline Banks. I believe she was from Oklahoma. I cannot find Madeline on any social media. But my friend Gina from, 4th grade found me, on Facebook. My f Indira, who has since passed, found me on MySpace. And then
So
I was
now,
always in touch
sorry,
with friends.
but so are you supporting, do you think that is because you had grown up partially overseas, that you don't have these relationships?
I think that when we were doing that, it was a little harder, but I also
Mm,
think that part of it is just m I do much better at responding and not necessarily so good at initiating contact. Because even when
mhm.
I'm talking about the people who found me. Um, so I don't know if that's just the personality developed for me or
Who
that's
you
just
are.
the way I am. Yeah, it could just be who I am. Um, I don't have it's not like I'm not friends with them because there was some sort of falling out, but, like, when we were in elementary, even middle and high school, long distance phone calls were expensive. You weren't gonna be picking up a phone to talk to someone, and I was never phone people. And letter writing, I don't recall doing much of it in elementary school. Definitely not in middle school or high school. So, um, yeah,
I mean, I'm not, I mean, I thought it was an interesting conversation with this
yeah,
lady because she definitely saw it as a negative aspect of her upbringing, and I felt it was a non-issue for me. I'm not saying,
yeah,
like, I've got 20 friends from elementary school from, like, the various international schools I went to. I have none from but I don't think that's relevant because who's still friends with their elementary school? Unless you live in the same community together, I don't really,
yeah,
I
and
mean,
I think that that's one thing that some especially people who've grown up and stayed where they
mm,
grew up, see as a positive is having all of these connections to people who've
yes.
known them for a long period of time.
I think that's what this woman thinks she's missed out on, but I
And
don't think that's necessarily positive. I mean, no offense, if you do, that's great, but I don't need that. So
yeah.
I don't know.
I've actually always considered it a positive to be able to walk in anywhere and develop new friendships.
Mm,
What I have found as I've gotten older is it can be hit or miss on how deep those are,
mm,
kind of thing. But
yes,
I
yes,
always
yes, yes.
attribute it more to where I'm at as opposed
Yes.
to the nature of how old or young you are or where you walking into or not. Like, I consider it much more of a strength to be able to know that you can go into a new space and develop new people that you are connected to and you can be friends with. How deep
Mhm.
or not those are can vary, but I
Yeah.
have those skills. So, again, it is seen by some as a drawback, and
Mm.
it's interesting that folks prioritize long term. I
Mm.
prioritize depth and support. Like, there have been times in my life where somebody that I've met recently was a better friend
Mhm.
than people that I'd known longer. And maybe it was just that moment in time. Maybe they just understood better what I was experiencing, you know?
Mm. Mhm.
But to me, the depth of the relationship or the amount of support that you're able to give each other is a bigger indicator than just length of time.
Yeah. I thought it struck me with me, that conversation. It was only like a month ago, and I don't, she must
Well,
have something missing that
it's
from her
possible, but I
past.
also know that there is a I don't know if we'd call it from the Akashic record or a Jungian
Mm.
general understanding, but especially in adolescence, like if you think about middle school, that can be a
Mm.
trying time, even if you are going to school with people that you went to elementary school with. Um, and my sister, Wanda, actually wrote an essay about how she admired that I had moved during high school into a place where a lot of people had gone to school together. Not everybody, there were people,
Mm,
like, the new people had moved in 5th grade. Like, that was literally a description that somebody had given me one time. But, that I went into this high school with
mm,
people who'd been there, a majority, because by the time my sisters were going to school there, it had flipped. But when I started in that school, the majority of people had been there at least since elementary school. That was the majority. By the time my sisters were going there, it had flipped to the majority of people were coming in because we were living in the fastest growing county in the nation. So they were
mm,
coming in, yes, from the military, but you also had people just moving in up from California, moving into a place that had better cost of living and life.
mhm.
So it went during my freshman year of high school from a from a double A school in terms of size to a triple A school. Um, so the school by the time I graduated was 1,600, and mine was the
Yeah.
smallest class that year. So we graduated, I think it was 364, 65 people. Um, but like my sister's class was over 400. So
Mm.
it was shifting. But she wrote an essay about how she really admired how I went into this and I thrived. At least that was her perception. My perception was I was, I don't know. I never really thought that I fit in that well. But
Is this because is this when you moved from Germany?
no, we moved from
Oh,
Germany to on base. And the thing about being on base is
ah.
everybody's been the new kid. So I totally fit in on base. Like that was fine.
So
E-
what were you moving from when you
So
went to the
my dad
school?
retired. So we left base and we moved out on the economy. So we moved to a house
Ah.
my parents had bought. And I went to a new school district where, so yeah, we
Oh,
weren't far
okay.
from
All
base, but
right.
we were no
Okay.
longer within the same catchment for the school
Oh,
district or
okay.
anything. Yeah.
But I mean, let's be honest. Army bases are their own
Mhm.
ecosystem.
They
It's
are.
very separate,
And
different.
that ecosystem had spread out in the 4 years,
Mm.
like, there's 3 years between my sisters and I. So, by the time so 3 years after we'd moved, there were a lot more people from the base who were living near where we were at. But
Uh-huh.
when we
Uh-huh.
first
Uh-huh.
got there, like, the regular town buses did not come to our location until I think
Mm.
my junior year, but my first year did not come. And we were in an area that you had to drive. I mean, you could bike, but it was a little dangerous. Like, like there was no transportation. Um, the It was a lot of housing going up. Again, Thurston County was the fastest growing county in the nation
So,
at the
how long were you on the base when you came back from Germany?
4 years. So 5th, 6th, 7th,
Wow.
and 8th grade.
And then you transitioned to Thurston or
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
off
Thurston
base
County.
life.
Yeah.
Yep.
Lacey, Washington. And I was there for all 4
Oh,
years of high school. And what I was getting at was that there does seem to be a general, I would call it fear, discomfort around going into a new environment like that,
of
that
course.
a lot of people
Any
have.
school is scary.
Yeah, and I'm not saying I wasn't scared, but my experience prior to that had been moving to places where everybody had been the new kid
Mhm.
or was about to be. You know what I mean? Like when you're on a military base and you're moving, and it was my first experience because when you've all been the new kid, what I had experienced before was everybody was nice to the new kid, shot them the ropes and everything, and then you decide whether you like them 2 or 3 weeks later. Going into this environment, it was really interesting because it was my first experience of people making judgments about me without knowing me,
Mm.
not necessarily being very welcoming or kind. And I won't say everyone, because that was not the case. There's actually somebody I'm still friendly with. I see her stuff on Instagram, who I'd gone to 7th grade with, and she had moved in 8th grade to the new school district I was at. So I did go to high school with her. In fact, we graduated together, but we'd never been friends in
Mhm.
either of the places before. but she's probably one of the people I see the most stuff from, and she's an expat, as far as I know. She might be an immigrant now, I'm not sure, but I think she had moved to Ecuador. Um, but yeah,
Oh, okay.
I was on the military base with her and then saw her again, in high school, but again, we weren't really friends that I recall. Like, I know her, but it's knowing somebody and being friends with them aren't necessarily the same thing, so, um, but yeah, it was my first experience. Somebody of, like, I don't know if you could call it bullying. It might just be my temperament isn't a tendency towards experiencing it, but, like, somebody making fun of my clothes. I'd never been
They
into
they
brands.
did that?
Yeah, yeah. Um, and there was something else that happened, but I might have blocked it out. There were little things that happened, but I just
Yeah.
never recall, and again, this is where your own temperament comes into play. And I just had a really solid family to back up on. Um, I had a belief system in my own brain and my abilities. So, oh, I remember when this happened freshman year. So I had so much energy. I used to bounce. We had a commons, and I used to bounce. Like, it wasn't flapping my hands. I mean, I would bounce like on my knees, like.
Oh.
And one of my friends had this junior guy come up and say, "Oh, BG, you look really," I don't know if he said you look stupid or something, but he said something about you might wanna stop doing that. And I was sitting, I remember the thought process because I was like, "You're getting a D plus in algebra trig, and I'm getting a B plus, A minus, and you're trying to call me stupid?" And I didn't say any of this out loud, but I'm using it as an example of how my own sense of self protected me in a way from, 'cause I think somebody else could have felt bullied or diminished or whatever, and I was just like, "Oh, dude, you just picked the wrong thing to call me," you know, that just didn't hit my ego
I
in
was
any way.
interested to see if it was a direct Germany, well, it is kind of because it's the base, but
Yeah,
the transition, because I remember I did my last 2 years of high school and American school in Japan, and I remember the embassy rolled out this new program for kids, help transition them back to the States, and I was like, "What is this?" And it's like a hotline you could call. I don't know if it still exists. You can call this hotline when you're back in America, and there's a bunch of supports. You can get together with other embassy kids. I cannot imagine why you would want to. Um, and like if you're having like trouble fitting in to, and I guess if you're coming into a school like that, maybe after being at a few international schools where it is everyone's been new. So obviously they felt like there was a need for some
yeah,
kind of it was like a transitional support for embassy kids back to America, which I thought was very interesting. But yeah.
I don't know why, but for some reason, the thing that comes to mind for me is, so I spent most of the '70s abroad, like, even the first 2 years of the '80s, and the biggest thing for me was literally having to watch reruns of stuff because I didn't understand some of the references that they would
Oh,
have.
that happened to me a lot.
You know,
Yeah.
like, whether it was the cartoons or, like, just things that they had seen or heard that I
It's
just,
cultural references that you miss out on.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
like,
I
that
got
was
very
that
used
was
to
the
that.
biggest, and again, on base, you don't notice it as much because most of the kids have some
Mm,
holes, but I
mm,
really noticed it, like, in high school or even in early college, of just, like, people referencing things. Now the thing about early
mhm.
college is going from the West Coast to the East Coast, that there were differences there too. Like, sometimes all the West Coasters would be like, "I have no idea what they're talking about." So I didn't feel quite as out of it, just because there was a whole contingent of people who had gone east, and none of them knew it either, so, but there are a few things that, like, I've learned via reruns. like
Mm,
the Brady Bunch and Bewitched and just TV shows a lot, but also commercials. Like Mikey likes it. I don't that reference went over my head for so long until
mm,
they started showing like the commercial again or something. Like I
yeah,
just had no idea what they were referencing. It was a
yeah.
common thing.
I
Oh,
guess
but Mikey likes
that's how I guess you could feel more disconnected if which I suppose could have a negative impact. I'm a little bit different because I spent a lot of my overseas life in Japan, and my mother is Japanese. So um, I was in a weird experience of being overseas and yet in my mother's home
home
country.
country.
So, uh, and I used to go see my grandmother and, so it was a little bit different, but Korea was fully foreign. And we were careful not to say we were half Japanese because they don't like Japanese at the time. Um, and then the Philippines, that was also very expat experience. Yeah, so,
Another place not that fond of the Japanese.
welcome to Asia. Yeah.
Yes. I did notice that even World Cup wise. Um, when we were in Germany, especially the last year, whenever we would leave base, my mom would insist that we spoke in Spanish, which meant my sisters almost didn't talk, but, like, she was like, "Do not speak in English," because there was a lot of, like, anti-nuclear sentiment,
Mm.
and a lot of the young Germans were really against the
Oh,
US military
yes.
bases.
That's
And in fact,
right.
the bus I used to take to school, the year after we left, had soldiers on it with rifles, with
Mm.
AK-47s actually, um, the year after we left. So and there were bomb threats every single week.
Oh, yeah.
Go to the
Yeah.
commissary or the PX, it would get evacuated for a bomb threat. I mean, like, every week there was a
Yep.
bomb threat. So,
Yeah.
like, yeah, I it wasn't host country. The other thing is, talking about the language facility, after having been in Germany at that point, we were coming up on 4 years. My 4th grade year, I started taking German in 1st grade, so 1st, 2nd, 3rd. 4th grade year, I got put into a class where there were, I think, 10 of us in this special German class. Um, and all of the other 9 kids had German mothers, and
Mm.
both of
Mhm.
my parents were Puerto Rican. Now, my mom had lived in Germany 8 years off and on prior to that, with her dad, because her dad had been stationed in Germany multiple times, and she'd even graduated from high school in Germany. But what I remember is, maybe it's because my mom's more shy than I am, is that when we would go places, I don't think I recognized how much German my mom had, because she would make
Mm.
me go talk to the people and ask for things, or ask how much something cost, or ask for another size, or things like that. So, but she always went out. My mom never stayed on base. Even in Japan, I think I've shared this story before, but, um, she got her license, and it was 1973, so, like, we didn't have, like, I believe now they have signs in both, like, the Latin lettering and the kanji, but none of that was up when she was there. She had to take all of the road signs test to make sure she can understand and drive appropriately. Um
I think you made a really good point about like, the security aspect of it, because I think that's something you people forget as well. Because when you're growing up overseas, depending on where you're living, but even wherever you're living, particularly army, embassy, the minute there's a hint of a security threat, everything ramps up, right? Um, and, like, also where you're living can be a little bit dicey because when we lived in Korea, in Seoul, um, South Korea is still technically at war with North Korea. And so there's a lot of exercises with the US. We had air raid drills every month. On the
Mhm.
15th, there would be sirens that went off. And then one eighth grade math class, we had a air raid without warning. It wasn't the appointed time, so it was real. It was a real infiltration of the South Korean airspace. All the sirens went off in Seoul. So my school was an evacuation point. So the idea was if something happened, everyone's moved wherever they need to be. So we were already at school. And then we would be taken out of Korea and then maybe Japan. We'd be reunited with our parents. So that everyone knew that was what we were supposed to be doing. Kids were crying and we are sitting against the wall crouched because there was a bombing against the windows. Um, People praying and people were really scared. And it turned out it was two Chinese jet fighters had flown into South Korean airspace because they were defecting. But we didn't nobody knew that for, like, a good hour or 2, so we thought, "This is it. This is the attack." Um, so it's, like, stuff like that, I think and you kind of forget it in the back of your mind because, um and it was also in Korea, it was a dictatorship. It wasn't democratic the way it is now, and so there were loads and loads of student protests, and our school was right next to a major top tier university. So they were very active as students are.
Yes.
And so every time it was nicer weather in the spring, out come the riots. And so our bus schedule was based on the riot schedule. So sometimes we would be, because our bus had to go in front of the university's main gates to drop everyone off. And sometimes we'd be coming in right before the riot. So on the left-hand side are the students with their masks and batons and sticks, and then on the other side are the riot police. And then a lot of times we'd come in after. Oh my God! And the tear gas was just because you're just like tearing and you're
Mhm.
sneezing and everyone's like, but it was so normal for us. We'd just be like, "Close the windows," and we'd close the windows, and everyone's kind of, like, sneezing a little bit, and, if you don't close it early enough, you're getting the full waft of it, but it'll be, like, rocks everywhere and really not very nice, but,
I realize
there's a lot of stuff like that, like, in Manila, my dad had to take the, like, embassy van, and they picked a different route each day for security reasons. Um, and that just becomes so normal to you. And I think you can't, when you go back to the States and you see relatives or whatever, friends, and they can't relate. There's no understanding of that. And I can see why that would also be a source of disconnect, right?
yeah. Well, it's a very different experience, but even for
Mm,
me, I'm realizing I moved back to the States before that, like, literally just before that started becoming more of an issue, like, in other places, because prior to that, I think even I can't speak to the '60s or the '50s other than what I read about historically, but I feel like in the '70s, there was still a I don't know if thankfulness is the right term, but there was still this idea of a respect for the United States,
mm,
and, um, best propaganda machine in the world is Hollywood, and they
mm,
were out in force, so I feel like it was in the mid '80s that we really started to see a shift. I'm not saying it shifted completely. I feel like there's a continuation of that shift happening, but I feel like I moved back to the United States around the time that that shift started having a more steep climb of people targeting those who represented the country, whether that was an embassy or the military or even a
Hmm.
corporation, um,
I don't know. I
when
don't
you're a
know, actually.
force.
I don't have a sense of that because I think for us, it was like Korea was fine. No one was like,
Yeah.
they had their own issues. Um, Philippines was a little bit different, but there was a lot going on there. There was a lot of targeting of Chinese,
Mm,
more than us. So
gotcha.
there, I feel like that is a very country specific. I will say with the first Iraq war, oh my God, we were still overseas and I was going back from Smith. Um, my God, the security was like crazy. That did not help matters.
Yeah, my best friend from 7th and 8th grade was serving on a
Mm,
naval, one of those big aircraft carriers, I think, um, in the Gulf
mhm.
when it was declared.
Yes, Gulf War, that's what it was.
Yes,
Sorry.
the first Gulf. It's alright. All these weird things that they
There's
call
so
them.
many bloody wars. I can't keep track
I
of
mean,
them,
I
but
think somebody somewhere has done a count of how many years the United States has not been involved in a violent conflict, and I
mm,
don't know if the number is 0, but it's pretty damn skippy close.
mm,
Um, but yeah, so she was on one of those, um, while I remember being in a car in the tunnel when it was first declared.
mm.
Coming back to the drawbacks. So, we have security concerns that you cannot necessarily convey to somebody who has not experienced that.
Yeah, like a disconnection with people from your
Yeah,
own country who
just because your
wouldn't
experiences are
experience
different.
it. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So one of the other drawbacks that they list, and by they I mean the various experts that got collected into this, rootlessness. Frequent moves can make it hard to feel fully at home in
Rootlessness.
any one place. And here's where I differ on this. And I'm coming back to the fact that I remember pretty young determining that home was where the people I cared about were.
Mm,
It was never a place exactly. I will say that even to this day, when I'm going into Puerto Rico and
mm,
I'm landing, I feel a connectedness to the land there. I definitely feel that. And while I lived in New York City, it's probably one of the places I felt most connected to because New York City to me felt like a giant military base because
mm.
everybody is from somewhere else. Like, one of my
Oh,
favorite
right.
stories is working at Citibank, and a bunch of people were standing around talking about where they were from, and one guy was talking about, "Well, I was born and raised in the city in Chinatown." He was of Chinese descent, had grown up in Manhattan, Chinatown. Just for all of you New Yorkers, I understand that Chinatown is now at the end of the 7 train for the most part in Flushing. But when he was growing up, it was still in Manhattan. So he had grown up in Lower East Side-ish, Chinatown, Manhattan. Somebody else was talking about growing up in Queens and Forest Hills,
Mm,
which is where I happen to live. Love her. But this one guy, and I cannot for the life of me remember his name, though I think it began with a van, was talking about how his people were Dutch. Well, his people were Dutch and had been in New York City since it was New Amsterdam. He'd grown up on the Upper West Side.
is he like a rich guy?
Um,
Wealthy old
he
family
was
or
not
just
old.
old
He was
family?
our age. I never explored whether he came from a wealthy family or not. It's possible. I mean, to grow up on the Upper West Side, there are, especially back in the day, there were rent stabilized apartments. The city did make an effort at one time to have people of varying, at least white people of varying socioeconomic class living with each other. So I don't know.
That's amazing though, really,
Yeah.
that his family's from that long ago, and they know that.
Well, and that was the whole thing is that if you ask a lot of for lack of a better term, white Americans or European Americans, um, where their people are from, some of them can tell you and some of them don't really know, and I remember just being so fascinated that here I was in New York City and everybody commented about where their people are from. Even if it was like, hey, yeah, my people are English, or, like actually they're Welsh and Scottish, like people would get that specific. They wouldn't just say, hey, I'm a Brit. They would say, what part of Great Britain, you know?
Well, yeah, they
But
would.
for Americans,
No, Americans, they don't care. It's
they,
one
they
big
don't
blob,
care.
but
They just say,
for
but in New York City, people would be more specific. And it
mm,
could just
mm,
be because there's more people together in one place, so it
mm,
gives you room to differentiate. The reason I say that is when I was in high school and even uh, late elementary, anyways, when I was in Washington State, I was Puerto Rican, but if you were Caribbean or Dominican, you were my cousin. Like anybody from the Caribbean, Venezuelan, like anybody from that region we were one because there were so few of us
mm,
up there. But
yeah.
you get to New York City, and I was like, no, I'm Puerto Rican from like the San Juan Retro area. My family's from Copan. Like you get a lot more specific about where you're from when there
Yeah.
are more of you, But when there's like, I swear my dad knew every Puerto Rican in Puget Sound, every single one. He probably knew half of the Dominicans and most of the Cubans as well. Like there just weren't that many of us at the time. So I this was after Smith. I was working in Bellevue, but living with my parents, and I was driving home, bumper to bumper traffic, pretty much. And all I see is some feet on a dashboard, and I see a Puerto Rican flag hanging, and this person's pulled off to the side. I literally pulled off to the side. It was a
Wow.
family friend. I knew
Oh.
her. And I was like, hey, do you need help? Do you need me to drive you? No, no, my dad's on his way. It's all good. Like, I knew her. Like, this
Mm,
was on I-5. Like I'm
yeah.
driving south on I-5 in heavy traffic. I happened to see the flag. I pulled over. I checked it out. I knew her. She was okay. Her dad was on the way. I was like, okay, then I'm going to go ahead and keep going because I still have a drive to get home. But that's what I mean by like, it's like that
Mm,
kind of thing. Um,
mhm.
okay. So that rootlessness, I think, again, it depends on, and I come back to the PhD student of like, if you have a core, I don't know if it's just ethnicity, but a core sense of what home is for you, and you're able to carry that with you, I don't know if you experience that particular drawback as much. How about you? How do you feel about that?
I mean, rootlessness. This is like that ethnic identity thing. Like, I
Yeah.
don't really understand what is the issue here because,
Feeling fully at home in one's place. Hard to feel fully at home in one's place.
I mean, okay, I do have this is my symptom, I guess. I mean, I do move around every few years, guilty. I move, and when I say move around, it's countries. Yes,
Mhm.
it's not neighborhoods.
I think I've only not visited you in Tunisia and East Timor. I mean, I couldn't go to East Timor, but I did not visit you in Tunisia.
Is this a negative? I
I
don't
don't
know. I mean,
I think
come
the way one
on.
looks at it has a big impact, like
I mean, rootlessness has let me live in DC, Michigan, Seattle, Hawaii, East Timor, Solomon Islands, Australia, Liberia,
didn't you do a
Tunisia, Malta.
short term in Vietnam too?
Oh, summer
Summer.
internship.
Yeah.
You know, is that bad? Is that
I think it's
I've
awesome.
actually I think it's cool. I went west all the way around the planet. I
You're
didn't zigzag
circumnavigating the
back.
globe
Yep,
living.
I didn't zigzag back. I just kept going west all the way around. Is that
So,
is that a negative?
well, they say that some people can feel it as one.
I guess
You and
if
I
you
obviously don't, but then I
yeah,
I put down some serious roots because while she was going west, I copped a squat in Forest Hills, Queens, and stayed there for
you did.
22 years.
You
22
did.
years. So,
'Cause you
yeah,
bought that apartment, didn't you?
I still own it.
That's
Yeah,
one thing is I'm allergic to purchasing any home like, I've had opportunities to do that in whatever country, but I was like, "Nah," I didn't want to put the roots but I think you can also take that as nothing to do with the way I grew up. It could just be it wasn't right, and I knew it wasn't
yeah.
right. So
Well, mine kind of felt, like when it feels like the universe kind of plops something down for you. Because when
mhm,
I first, like, I didn't necessarily move countries, but when I first moved to New York City, I was like, oh, I'll be here 2, maybe 4 years. And then I think I'm going to try each of the corners of the US and then figure out what's next.
mm,
And after 2 years, the guys who owned the apartment were like, well, we want to sell it. So you can either buy it or be prepared to move out.
mm.
And I was working for a bank at the time. It seemed much less of a pain in the ass to buy it and figure out what to do after. Like, it was
Yeah.
literally I mean, all those papers you have to sign, all that application you have to fill out was less work than trying to find someplace else to live.
Yeah. Well, I can see that. Yeah,
Yeah, and so
yeah.
I bought the place, but it wasn't like and I bought the place with a distinct concept in my head of you could always rent it out or sell it if you don't
Yes,
wanna stay.
that's
That was
true.
the ol rent it out or sell it if you don't wanna stay. Plus,
Yeah.
New York City, even when it has downturns, it tends to continue to go up,
Mm.
and I was like, "If nothing else, it's a bit of an investment." Like,
Yeah,
even if
yeah.
I don't live in there and at the time, renting it out was much easier than it is now. But at the
Mhm.
time that I bought it, there was pretty lax oversight going on, so I was like, "Oh, I'll just rent it out. It'll be fine." It was practically it's a co-op, but it was practically a condo then. So, that's how I got to the point where I was able to buy it.
Mm.
So, in 2002, I bought my apartment, and then I refinanced it in 2003. It's a lot of work. But so is renting it under current auspices. Rootlessness. Oh, identity confusion is another drawback.
What? I've
So
heard this before. I heard this when I was growing up, peers or what,
yeah,
people telling me because 'cause you're overseas and whatever, you mixed up identity. I'm like, "I don't have a mixed up identity. I know who I am."
you're also an Aquarius.
Yes.
I think it would be really hard. I'm not saying it's not possible, but most Aquarians that I know have an internal sense of who they are. It doesn't necessarily matter what's going on around them. They know exactly who they are. Try and
I
convince
heard
them of something else.
I heard a lot of stuff like, "Oh, because you live overseas and you're American and you don't know what you are, you're confused and you can't adjust when you come back," and like, "Oh, poor you," and, I always loved being an expat kid. I loved it, and it was always something that made me special,
Yes.
and, I always waved it like a big old flag. Yeah,
Well,
some people were like, "Oh, poor you," and I'd be like, "Seriously?"
some of the TCKs struggle with questions like where am I from or
Okay,
feel
yes, that's
split
fair.
between cultures.
Yeah. But yes, the
I
first one, yes. Where are you from was
Oh,
always a very difficult question for me. Very.
for me, it always feels like I'm giving a soliloquy to try and answer
Yeah.
that.
I have to do like a
Like,
whole
I
biography.
after I'd been in New York for, like, 10 years, I just started saying New York City because it was the
Mm,
longest I'd ever lived any one place, and
mhm.
I felt like I could claim it. Though there are some schools of thought that if you did not go to school, especially high school in New York City, there's some people are like, "You can't claim it," but whatever. Um,
I would default to Tokyo is my hometown because that was the longest I had lived in any one city. So then that would actually confuse matters even more. So
well, I mean, for me, it's always a matter of like, how am I likely to see this person again? How much of an answer I
Yeah.
give? Because, like, for some people, what they're looking for is like, what's your ethnicity? I'm like,
Yep.
oh, I'm Puerto Rican. And then for some of the people are asking that they're like, oh, I'm Puerto Rican too. I'm from like I just the Tai Chi instructor at the Omega Institute. His last name was Rios, which is one of my surnames. So
Mhm.
I went up to
Mhm.
him and just said, I'm also a Rios on my mom's side. Um, and he's like, "Oh, what are you?" Kind of like he didn't ask, "Where are you from?" But, "What are you?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm Puerto Rican." Me too. His people are from Vega Baja. My mom's people are from Barceloneta. He's like, "Oh, no, I know Barceloneta," because he'd actually grown up on the island. It became a whole conversation. But for other people, like, I'll say New York City or like, "Where did you go to high school?" You don't have a New York accent. Washington State, like, south of Seattle. Because even if I said, like, Lacey, they don't know what that is. Half of them don't know that Olympia is the capital, so
If
it's a
I want
conversation.
to annoy someone, I'll do the full spiel, and then they'll be, like, so confused. They'll just it's silence, and I'm like, "Okay, bye." So, yeah, it depends on my annoyance level.
Well, I also have one because my sisters were born in Japan. So I'm like, "My sister's got the cool
Yeah,
birthplace. They were born in
yeah,
Japan. I was born in
yeah,
Christian County, Kentucky,
yeah.
and I can't seem to say it any other way.
Nope, you
Christian
never
County."
ever say it normally.
No, I don't.
You do not.
I cannot. I don't even know that that's a Kentuckian accent. I
I
just
don't
know that
know.
that's how I say
Probably
Christian
not.
County.
What was the
Okay,
second thing? What is that?
so
What was the
it was
second
where am I
problem?
from or feel split between cultures. So this is all identity confusion, rootlessness, identity confusion, and harder long-term relationships. So the three. So number 4 is culture shock, which I think we've touched on, but
Yes,
culture
that's
shock
fair.
and repatriation stress.
Yes,
Returning to a
yes.
passport country, which I find interesting because I have some friends who they are Chilean, but
Mm,
through grandparents have Italian citizenship. So there's 2 passports. Their daughters were born in the United States, so there's 3 passports. So this term is very interesting to me because when they were living in Jordan, if they returned to Italy, that would have been a passport country, but it's not a country that they'd actually ever really lived in. Um, they are now in the US, so that's returning to a passport country. And when they return to Chile, that's a passport country. So they would still have a little bit of confusion going on here. Anyways, returning to a passport country can feel surprisingly alien after living elsewhere. And I think
yes,
that is very true.
very
I think
true.
that is the case always. I mean, I spent 3 months only in Spain in 2024, and I felt like a need to like ground myself
Mhm,
when I
mhm.
came back. And that was as a full-blown adult, like
Yeah, yeah.
who'd lived here prior to. So, I think that one out of all 4 of them is the most
Yes,
universal.
I agree. That's that's a no-brainer. Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, the experience is often a mix of privilege and loss. TCKs may gain global skills and confidence while also carrying real emotional strain from, they say, constant change and separation. A lot depends on how much support the child has during moves and how well they're able to keep stable
Mm,
relationships and a sense of identity. I would also put in there that it depends on, there's a component of this. So that's all nurture. But I
yeah.
think that there's also a nature component of the temperament of the child, whether that's their
Yes,
personality or
yes,
how they come at things.
yes,
Because you can have 2 children in the same family experience the same moves, and one of them is completely flustered by it and has a
yep,
hard time, and the other
yep,
one thrives.
yep.
So, as much as those nurture aspects come through, I think that there's also a nature component of just who they are in the core
Yes,
of their being.
I completely agree with you. Yep.
But I believe like you consider it, no, you said this. I consider it something special, something that's
Mhm,
actually enriched my life and
mhm.
added to it. And it reminds me of, I don't know, do you remember Allison? She was Scottish, blonde
Yes.
hair. So I remember in 2004, I went with Melanie and Christy and Fiona, and we went to Scotland. We were in Edinburgh, and
Nice.
Allison and her now husband, he was her fiance, I believe, at the time, and a few of
Nice.
their friends came to meet up with us. And they were just really excited to meet up with us. And we were like, oh, okay, awesome. I mean, I knew Allison, it was lovely. It was, but
She was really nice. I remember she was so nice.
so nice and
Mm,
so incredibly welcoming. And we were
mm.
just in a pub, we were all having a conversation, and they were talking about one of their friends who had not come. And I was like, "Oh, why didn't come?" It's like, "Oh, well, his gal doesn't travel." And I was like, "Huh?" I'm like, "Yeah, we don't really get along with her." And but they said doesn't travel with like a tone to it. And I was like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, and they explained they weren't trying to be mean or anything. They're like, she doesn't want to try different foods. She doesn't want to explore different things. She only wants what she knows and nothing else. She's not interested in anything else. And they were a whole friend group. But part of the reason they were so excited to come meet a bunch of American women who were coming from like all over the country, I think at that point. Is that right? I know Christy lived in New York City at one point, but I don't know if she was living in New York City at the time. She might have been. Fiona was from Toronto, so not American, technically Canadian. Um, and actually, she's a Brit. Her mom was from Malta, her dad was from Ireland. They met in London.
Okay.
So, and Melanie was coming from, I think, New York at
Oh,
the time, but had been in
yes.
Portland. Anyways, they were
Yes.
excited because they love this concept of knowing people in other places that they might be able to go visit. You know, like it was like a mutual exchange, like people who loved to travel.
Was this
And
lady like, had she undergone trauma? Was
I
it a
don't know,
trauma response?
they did not describe any of that to
Oh.
me, but what I
Oh.
remember the Melanie, Fiona, and myself, we loved the term "doesn't travel" because we were all people who traveled and who were interested in traveling and who wanted to meet people from other places and were interested. It's not that we always like the food that we try someplace else. You don't, you don't always like it, but we were at least interested in trying it.
I wonder if
And
something happened to her. That
it,
seems very strange.
it was strange to them. It was strange to us. As far
Mm,
as they were able to explain, they did not know of anything,
mm.
but I don't know that we questioned that because what we were most
Mhm,
interested in was the term that they had used because it
mm.
became this sort of, I don't know that we use it very often now, but for a time it was like a shorthand of like people who travel. I don't know about if this happens to you, but there's something to me about going to an airport. I feel very comfortable
Mm.
in like an airport environment. We're like, these are people who travel, especially
Well, no,
international
that's
travel.
not true. Yeah,
No?
okay, yeah. Let's be clear on the terminal you are
Okay,
in,
okay.
okay? Yes, because 100%, a lot of those people do not know what they're doing in the security line, and, it's like the first time they have encountered other people. It is amazing. So, yes,
Yes, there are definitely
international
people,
terminal, yes.
but even in the international terminal, I've run across a few people, but I would say you definitely run across some people
There's
who either
more,
cannot
yes,
follow instructions, do not know where
correct.
to look for them,
Yep.
or are just overwhelmed by the whole process. I mean,
That's
my mom
mostly
does,
domestic, I think.
she
Any
might.
country, it's mostly in the domestic terminal. My
Yeah,
God.
but international terminal is where I feel most at home.
Yes,
Not
that's yeah.
saying I don't in a domestic terminal, I can handle it, but, um, an international terminal just feels like there's a, and I don't know how true this is. I'm just talking about how it feels. It feels like there's a commonality of understanding of the world, of the fact that it's bigger than where we're currently standing, kind of thing. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so the term "doesn't travel" became sort of like a de facto code for somebody who might not be of the same nature.
Mm, yes. Mm.
And I don't think it gets used very much anymore. And I don't know how accurate it is, but it was just, we were, I'll speak for myself. I was just so surprised by 'cause it made so much sense to me when they described what they meant by that.
Mm.
And I think there's a lot of people who and I don't necessarily take anything away from it if you can be open to the fact that others are interested, but, like, there are people who don't ever leave their hometown, or if they
Yes,
do, they
I've
go
heard that. Yeah.
like, I have something I don't get, and I know some of it comes from my mom, but and we went to Disney World senior year of high school, but, like, going to Disneyland or Disney World never came my family just didn't have the money. But even when I've had it, after we went as adults, I was just like, "I don't understand the fascination," and I'm talking with adults who go back to Disneyland or Disney World regularly. It must be something amazing for them, like, maybe they have happy memories, maybe it's just
Mm.
like, to your point of, like, something must have happened to her, maybe these folks associate something great with this.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
even when my nephews have been small, my sisters and I have never been interested in, like, "Let's take them to Disneyland or Disney World." Like, it was much more Nettie was like, "Let's take him to Paris. Let's take him to Rome." Like, Wanda's like, "Let's go to Singapore. Let's go" like, I mean, they would go to the Bahamas or, like, the beach in Puerto
Mhm.
Rico, but they weren't into going to this, I wanna say, artificial place of
Yes,
happiness and
it
joy.
is definitely artificial.
But I know people who love it. I just don't understand it.
I don't
Like,
know
I'm not
anyone
a
who loves
Disney
it.
person. I have people in my world who have been multiple times.
Wow.
I just I'd I wanna go to Japan. I'd like to go to Cambodia. I'd love to go to China. Like, I think there's so much culture, and I'd love to go to another country in Africa. I've only
Mm.
been to one, like, and that's a huge continent. Huge. I've only been one place in South America. I've only been to Argentina. I'd love to go someplace else in
Oh,
South America.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like, I there's plenty I'd love to go see. I don't need
Yes.
to go back to Disney World.
No, you don't need to do that.
Though Nettie was working at Universal at one point, and Miguel and I still talk about this. We went to a hole in the wall Cuban place in, like, one of those strip malls.
Mhm.
I don't know what was going on, but Wanda I don't think Nettie was with us. I think she was working, but
Mm.
Wanda wasn't interested in the rice. I don't think Marcos Gabrielito was really small. But Miguel and I got this rice. It was the best plain old white rice I've ever had in my life. To the point where you mentioned it to Miguel and I were like, "Oh, yeah." And by the time we were done, I think we only let Wanda and Nettie, like, have a bite each so they could taste how good this rice was, because we were like Miguel and I looked at each other. We were scarfing it down. We weren't sharing with nobody. And this was plain white rice. This was not fancy.
Wow!
It was so good. So good. I know that
Did
they
you
must
ask them what made it so good? You should have asked them.
I don't know if we did. I know one of the things that I determined was there was definitely some, like, um, pernil fat, so pork fat that
Yeah,
had been used
yeah.
in the making of the rice. So I know that instead of
Oh,
using, like, because we often use, like, a little bit of oil or something,
yeah,
but they definitely used something with some flavor. So I think it was a really good seasoned pernil, and
yep.
the seasoning had made it into the oil, and that was used in the rice in the making of it.
Ah, yeah.
That's my thought. I don't remember asking, but we might have. It was good.
Mm,
I'm talking about, like, not too long ago, I mentioned this rice to Miguel, and both he and I just started, like, salivating, like,
wow.
yeah,
And
it was
that's
good.
what you get when you travel,
Yep.
everybody.
That was to Universal Studios. It
Okay, bad
was
example,
being
but it's still
adventurous.
travel.
It was
Yeah.
travel, and it was being adventurous because we weren't eating on the studios, we went to a
Oh,
hole in the
see?
wall.
There you go. Yeah,
Yeah,
good
yeah.
example.
So, there are definitely pluses and minuses to being a third culture kid of many different stripes.
I would
Uh,
say more pluses than
and
minuses.
Yes, and I would agree. At least for Katie and I think we found it to be something that has enriched our lives and
Good.
continues. Like that foundation continues to lay the groundwork for what we currently do in terms of travel or interest or
Hmm.
curiosity. So, um, but there's lots of different terms, there's lots of different things. And the biggest aspect is staying curious, continuing to learn,
Exactly.
and being open to the fact that we don't know everything. Neither do you. So we share. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great day.
Thank you.